In the unwritten rules of becoming U.S. president, there are basically three types of people who succeed. 1. National heroes with outstanding military achievements, like George Washington or five-star General Eisenhower. 2. Those born into political dynasties with a head start, like the Kennedy or Bush families. At the very least, they need to be political golden boys, like Bill Clinton or Barack Obama, law school graduates who've spent decades climbing the political ladder. Trump? Before becoming president, his political resume was completely blank. He had never held any public office. Not only that, he had gone bankrupt 6 times and was reportedly in debt for up to $1 billion, about $100 billion tiny d. In the 1990s, at his lowest point, his airline company collapsed, his yacht was seized, and his casinos filed for bankruptcy one after another. Walking down the streets of New York, he once pointed at a beggar and told his girlfriend, "Look, that guy has more money than I do right now." So how did a man who repeatedly failed in business, drowning in debt and lawsuits, crawl out of hell and eventually become the most powerful person on earth? Today, let's talk about how Trump rose from the ashes and how he was elected president. Many people imagine Trump's rise as the classic poor man works hard and succeeds story. He constantly emphasizes, "I'm strong, I'm a winner," and says it with extreme confidence. Over time, people only remember that he's amazing, without really knowing how. In reality, Trump is a bona fide rich second-generation heir. His father, Fred Trump, was a very wealthy real estate developer who built numerous middle-class housing projects in Brooklyn and Queens, New York, profiting from government subsidies and rental income. By the time Trump was 3 years old, he was already receiving an annual income of $200,000. By age 8, he was a millionaire. Trump often mentions that his father gave him a small loan. Yes, that small loan was about $1 million. In total, he received over $400 million in assets and inheritance from the family business. If he had stayed in Queens and simply continued his father's model, he would have been just another very rich but unremarkable landlord. But for Trump, making money was only the basic requirement. Being admired was his ultimate goal. In the 1970s, New York City was on the brink of bankruptcy. The subways were filthy, crime rates were terrifying, and many middle-class residents fled to the suburbs. Everyone wanted to escape Manhattan. At that time, Trump was in his 20s and had just taken over his father's real estate empire. He saw an opportunity. Although he didn't have much cash, he used his gift of gab and his father's connections to approach the Hyatt Hotel Group. He said, "I'll persuade the government. You provide the brand. Let's make money together." What was most impressive was how Trump, with nothing but words, turned a nearly bankrupt hotel project into the future landmark of Manhattan. He convinced the government to grant him 40 years of tax breaks, effectively pulling $160 million in tax relief out of New York taxpayers' pockets. Banks, seeing government support and the backing of Old Man Trump, lent him tens of millions. On Fifth Avenue, the heart of Manhattan, he built Trump Tower. This building was essentially a livable billboard. Or you could say it was the architectural embodiment of Trump's narcissism. The decoration was extremely luxurious. From then on, he never abandoned that gold and marble aesthetic. This series of bold moves turned Trump from a local real estate developer into a nationally known tycoon. From the success of the Grand Hyatt and Trump Tower, he learned one key lesson. Other people's money is the most fun to spend. In truth, Trump has always played the same game. Others put up the money, the government gives the incentives, and he becomes the boss. If it succeeds, it's his epic victory. If it fails, it's someone else's fault. Emboldened by his early wins, Trump went on a wild acquisition spree in the 1980s, fully embracing his flashy style. He developed high-end real estate in Manhattan, hotels, luxury residences, and offices, always making sure the name Trump was prominently displayed.
The bigger, the better. Later, he decided that building skyscrapers was too slow, so he made a very Trump-like decision: go into the casino business. He built casinos in Atlantic City, near New York. The market was already crowded and highly competitive, so Trump chose to go all in, building the biggest, most luxurious, and most extravagant one, aiming to dominate the entire industry. In 1990, the Trump Taj Mahal opened, packed with every over-the-top element imaginable. Trump called it the eighth wonder of the world. But right at his peak, karma, or rather basic mathematics, caught up with him. To build this wonder, Trump had barely used his own money. He issued $675 million in junk bonds with an interest rate of 14%. This meant the casino had to pay bondholders over $1 million in interest every single day just to open its doors. The following year, Trump filed for bankruptcy. This was the beginning of his legendary 6 bankruptcies. Because the Atlantic City casinos were losing so much money, his Manhattan real estate empire began to crumble. His hotels and castles filed for bankruptcy one after another. Banks stopped pretending and started calling in the loans. Trump's private jet? Gone. His luxury yacht, the Trump Princess? Goodbye. Even Trump Airlines was taken away. In the early 1990s, New York media had already declared Trump finished. He was truly broke, deeply in debt, and every monthly expense had to be approved by the banks. At this point, most people would hide, keep a low profile, or fall apart. But Trump did the opposite. He appeared on television even more frequently. A bankrupt man started selling success seminars and even wrote a book, The Art of the Deal. The book became a global bestseller and successfully rebranded him from a New York tycoon into a business guru. Trump understood one crucial principle. If you owe the bank $1 million, you're the bank's problem. But if you owe the bank $1 billion, the bank is your problem. He knew that if your bluff was big enough and convincing enough, the banks would become his hostages. Remarkably, the banks compromised. Not only did they not force him into full liquidation, they even gave him a $450,000 monthly allowance to maintain his lifestyle. It wasn't because they suddenly became fans. It was because Trump's image was part of the asset. If he looked finished, the brand value would collapse and the banks would lose even more. So Trump continued riding in stretch limousines and private jets, maintaining the image of a tycoon. In the late 1990s, Trump realized he had no money and no credit, but his name could still make money. He started licensing his name to everything imaginable. Trump buildings, Trump vodka, Trump steaks, Trump magazine, Trump bottled water, you name it. He didn't produce anything himself. He just licensed the name and collected millions in royalties every year. This was the ultimate evolution of spending other people's money, using others' capital to build his personal brand while others bore the risks. In 2004, Trump made a smart move. He began hosting the reality TV show, The Apprentice. The production team successfully repackaged a man who had been drowning in debt in the 1990s into an ultra-successful tycoon sitting in a golden tower, holding the power of life and death over contestants. Every episode ended with his famous line, "You're fired." This show not only cleaned up his image and turned him into a symbol of a tough, decisive leader, but also earned him around $200 million. More importantly, it gave him a golden ticket into politics. He discovered that media was far more powerful than real estate. As long as he spoke loudly and controversially enough, the media would amplify him for free. In 2011, as Obama prepared for re-election, Trump jumped into the spotlight by questioning whether Obama was born in the United States. Later, at a White House Correspondents' Dinner, Obama used a large screen to show a mock image of Trump's White House, turned into a tacky golden building with fountains and bikini-clad models on the lawn. Obama then mocked him, saying he should go back to hosting The Apprentice. As the entire room of elites burst into laughter at Trump, the cameras captured his stony, stiff, and deeply embarrassed expression. For someone as image-conscious as Trump, this was a massive humiliation.
Many believe this night of collective mockery by the establishment elite was what ultimately convinced him to run for president. Running for president as an independent was unrealistic. Under the Electoral College system, he needed to join a major party. The Democrats emphasized political correctness, racial diversity, equality, and inclusion, completely at odds with his macho, America first, you're fired persona. The Republican establishment, on the other hand, had just been crushed by Obama in 2012. Trump saw a large group of angry voters within the Republican base with no strong leader. So he joined the Republicans, using their organization and platform as a vehicle. He brought in his own brand and aimed to turn the Republican Party into the Trump Party. He began posting frequently on Twitter, criticizing government incompetence, bad trade deals, and claiming that if he were president, he could fix everything with one phone call, just like on his show. At this point, he was no longer just a New York real estate developer. He had become the voice of the anti-establishment movement. In 2015, Trump declined to renew The Apprentice and announced his run in the Republican primaries. He faced 16 opponents, including Jeb Bush from the Bush family, Marco Rubio, who later became one of his key allies, and Ted Cruz, representing the conservative establishment. Trump's strategy was simple: give every opponent a nasty nickname: Low Energy Jeb, Little Marco, Lion Ted, etc. Though crude and childish, it was highly effective. While the political elite spoke elegantly about policy and tried to maintain their image, Trump attacked them mercilessly from the sidelines, mocking their competence, their looks, and waging a full-on mudslinging war. The establishment politicians had no idea how to fight back and were eliminated one by one.
By May 2016, he had become the sole Republican nominee, ready to face Democrat Hillary Clinton. Trump successfully painted Hillary as the embodiment of the establishment elite. People who had been in Washington for decades, deeply involved in backroom deals, power games, and cronyism. The establishment includes traditional politicians from both parties, mainstream media, Wall Street, and senior officials. Their defining trait is maintaining the status quo, speaking normally, and being rather boring. You can think of the establishment as a long-established but bureaucratic and inefficient giant corporation. Trump's main reasons for opposing them were clear. He was never part of that world. In the eyes of the Washington elite, he was just a rich outsider. Both parties looked down on him, and he knew he could never break into their circle. So he flipped the script. This company is broken. You need an outsider who understands business to come in and fire all these incompetent people. In many ways, Trump was America's version of Taiwan's Han Kuo-yu. Their campaign strategies were similar. Both positioned themselves as outsiders who didn't fit in with the elite mainstream. Han called himself a bald guy who had been selling vegetables for years. His slogan was simple: goods go out, people come in, Kaohsiung gets rich. How exactly? Not important. Trump's slogan was Make America Great Again, following the same logic as Kaohsiung was old and poor. He implied that America was in bad shape. Elections are about emotion, not detailed policy. He understood what people were angry about and expressed it in the simplest way possible. Trump had his MAGA supporters. Han had his Han fans. Both had ironclad loyalty. The mentality was, the more you attack him, the more I support him.
Why are MAGA supporters so loyal? Because they are the forgotten people. In the eyes of blue-collar workers in America's Rust Belt, globalization over the past few decades had closed factories and taken their jobs. The establishment told them they were no longer needed. Just disappear quietly. Trump said, "It's not your fault. It's the Chinese and Mexicans who stole your jobs. I will get them back for you." He made them nostalgic for the 1950s to 1970s, when factories were everywhere and one worker could support an entire family. When life feels unfair, if someone tells you it's not your fault, it's those bad people's fault, you will desperately support that person. Trump didn't talk about complex technological transitions. He simply said, "I will bring back coal mining. I will reopen steel plants." He told blue-collar workers, those politicians take money from big corporations and foreign governments, so they sold you out. But I'm already rich. I don't need their money.
so I will only listen to you. Whether this was true in reality is another story, but the message was incredibly persuasive, and they believed it. Blue-collar workers finally felt that a big boss was speaking their language. His unpolished, even crude tone made them feel he wasn't some aloof billionaire, but one of them. Meanwhile, Washington and the mainstream media created an atmosphere suggesting that not voting for Hillary meant you were uneducated or a societal loser. This only made the forgotten blue-collar class more united. In the polls, Hillary was consistently leading. The whole world thought she would win. In the end, Hillary did win the popular vote by nearly 3 million votes. But America uses the Electoral College system. Trump won narrowly in key states, ultimately securing 304 electoral votes to Hillary's 227. The decisive battlegrounds were Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, the Rust Belt states that had been Democratic strongholds since the 1990s. Many traditional Democratic voters switched to Trump. He won these 3 states by very slim margins, altogether fewer than 80,000 votes. Yet those states carried 46 electoral votes. If Hillary had held them, she would have won 273 to 258 and become the first female president in U.S. history.
After Trump won in 2016, unemployment in the Rust Belt did fall somewhat. Some manufacturing returned and wages rose slightly. However, these positive trends had already begun before he took office, during a generally good economic period. Unfortunately, due to automation, the factories that returned didn't necessarily bring back the same number of jobs. His trade war with China also hurt American farmers and some workers. The biggest blow came in 2020 with the pandemic. Trump's chaotic handling of COVID-19 caused factories to shut down and the economy to stall, shattering his image as an economic strongman, a major reason for his re-election loss. The MAGA dream of factories reopening everywhere, workers returning to good jobs, and life returning to the year 2000 never materialized, and realistically couldn't. True economic revival in the Rust Belt requires more than just shouting, "Bring back manufacturing." Look at successful transformations like Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was once the steel city, with smokestacks everywhere. Even Taiwan's Shiloh Bridge steel came from Pittsburgh mills. Today, they demolished the old steel plants and leveraged resources from Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Pittsburgh to transform into a center for healthcare and AI. Workers who successfully transitioned now earn higher salaries in a cleaner environment. This teaches us, whether Rust Belt workers in America or office workers in Taiwan, the most dangerous thing is to pin all your hopes on a single politician as a savior, believing that once the right person is elected, your salary will rise and housing prices will fall. The most important thing is still building your own capabilities.